The Richard Roeper Show is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. The digital landscape is changing rapidly, and to compete in today's online business environment, you need that experienced partner. Since 1995, AmericanEagle.com has partnered with companies of all sizes, offering web design, web development, e-commerce, mobile apps, and digital marketing to drive your overall business's success, because they believe that today's online world is your online opportunity. Visit AmericanEagle.com to get started. That's AmericanEagle.com to get started. AmericanEagle.com, and you know what you can do then? You can get started today. All right, welcome to the podcast. I'm Richard Roeper. We're going to go right into some entertainment news here. You might have seen this story from the New York Times and covered elsewhere. The head of CBS News has resigned. The president of CBS News, Wendy McMann, left her job on Monday of this week. As the New York Times says, this is the latest shockwave to hit the news division amid an ongoing showdown involving President Trump, 60 Minutes, and CBS's parent company, Paramount. Ms. McMann told her staff in a memo that it's become clear the company and I do not agree on the path forward. Executives at Paramount informed Ms. McMann on Saturday they wanted her to step down, according to several people with direct knowledge. That's the New York Times report on this. So whether Wendy McMann stepped down, was forced out, it was a mutual thing, that's still kind of in question. But, you know, the larger context here and what I wanted to talk about here, because as you know, we talk about all things movies and TV and media. The larger context is, you know, when you have the ongoing struggle, the separation of church and state, which is often not the separation of church and state, when news organizations feel like they are being influenced by corporate interest, by the big bucks ownership. And this happens more and more now because so many, news organizations, parent company is a giant entertainment conglomerate or an individual billionaire and his cohorts, whatever the case may be. And sometimes the influence and the persuasion and the suggestions are subtle, and sometimes they are not. So in this case, Paramount is in talks to settle a $20 billion lawsuit brought by President Trump, of course, that accused 60 Minutes of deceptively editing an interview with his Democratic opponent, Kamala Harris. Many legal experts have called the suit baseless, but Paramount's controlling shareholder, Sherry Redstone, has said she favors settling the case, and in the meantime is seeking federal approval for a multi-billion-dollar sale of her company to a Hollywood studio, Skydance. So you have all kinds of potential conflicts of interest and opposing views. And, we just had last month the executive producer of 60 Minutes, Bill Owens, resigning because, again, he was saying that, this is, some of this he said, they said, but Bill Owens was saying that the Paramount executives, cognizant of the settlement talks of Mr. Trump, had pressured him over the program's coverage of the Trump administration. This is also going on with Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post. As you know, the Amazon founder and multi-zillionaire Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post. And, listen, when you buy something, it's your toy to play with. No one's disputing that. So when Bezos bought the Post, he announced a significant shift in the newspaper's opinion section, said he wanted to emphasize content that supports personal liberties and free markets. The opinions editor at the Washington Post resigned. 400 staff members earlier this year sent a letter to Bezos expressing deep concern over recent leadership decisions, including the decision to withhold a presidential endorsement in 2024. So you have these famous super rich corporate execs who buy news organizations or control news organizations. And then there's the battle between profits and self-interest and journalistic integrity. One sidebar, this newspapers endorsing candidates, it's always been the editorial board, right, of a newspaper. So you have the editorial board, which consists of several, top journalists, and there's opinion pieces that are written. But I'm not so sure I disagree with Jeff Bezos in saying, we don't need to be endorsing candidates, because on one hand, you have newspapers that are supposed to be fair and objective in their coverage, and by and large, they are, even though we're not going to get into a whole thing about the lamestream media and all that nonsense and fake news. The vast majority of journalists and news organizations, especially I'm talking about print, yes, of course, there's always going to be a certain leaning, but they're reporting the news. It's very different from like an MSNBC or a Fox News or networks like that where it's very clear and they're very transparent about their political beliefs. So I always thought it was a little strange, even though, yes, it's the editorial board of a paper. But like when I worked at the Chicago Sun-Times, and the Sun-Times is always considered to be more of a Democrat, working class paper, and the Tribune a little more right-wing and conservative, whatever the case may be. But, if we're reporting on these candidates in the news side, we still have great political reporters at the Sun-Times, and they did at the Tribune and do at the Tribune as well. And then you have the editorial board, even though, yes, it's separate, it seems odd because if the Sun-Times comes out and says, we endorse, not only, we endorse Bill Clinton, but also, this candidate for lieutenant governor and that candidate for local Senate posts or mayor, whatever the case may be, the general public starts to think, well, geez, the paper's endorsing that candidate. How much am I to trust the reportage of that candidate? So this is nothing new. The conflicts between and the disputes between, as I mentioned, church and state, the editorial side, owners of newspapers and radio stations and TV stations historically for decades have often gotten involved. Others are hands off, of course, there's been great movies and books have come from some of these famous examples. Now, you sometimes have, the editor in chief or, the top executives taking the noble stance. And a lot of people can say that's what's happening at CBS right now. And famously, if you see a movie called, let's, you know what? I want to talk about the movie, The Post. Let's play the trailer from The Post. Let's take a listen.
This is a devastating security breach.
That was leaked out of the Pentagon?
The most highly classified documents of the war.
The Times has 7,000 pages detailing how the White House has been lying about the Vietnam War for 30 years. The way they lied, those days have to be over.
Okay, people are concerned about having a woman in charge of the paper.
That she doesn't have the resolve to make the tough choices.
Thank you, Arthur, for your frankness.
If you publish,
we'll be at the Supreme Court next week.
Meaning?
Well, we could all go to prison. What are you going to do, Mrs. Graham?
It's a great movie there. Tom Hanks as Ben Bradley and Meryl Streep as Katharine Graham, the editor of the Washington Post. So a lot of the Post is about the Pentagon Papers and Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley, risking possible jail sentences by going ahead and publishing the Pentagon Papers. And also with Watergate, if you go back after the Pentagon Papers, then you have Watergate, in terms of, hugely important political stories that were driven by investigative newspaper journalism. Of course, Woodward and Bernstein, the Watergate story brought to the paper. And Katharine Graham, if you don't know, like her whole history, was very rare and almost unheard of for a woman to be leading a giant news organization. And she also was, socially friendly with the Kennedys and the hobnobs, the hobnobbing types in Washington, high society and all that. Yet still eventually backed and always backed the reportage there. So sometimes you have ownership and editors who will back their reporters. There's also another great movie called The Insider, which is the story of Jeffrey Wigand, a former executive at the tobacco company Brown and Williamson. He's played by Russell Crowe in the movie. He becomes a whistleblower. Then he agrees to share confidential information with Lowell Bergman, a producer for CBS's 60 Minutes. He's played by Al Pacino. And Wigand revealed that tobacco companies were aware of the health risks of smoking, had deliberately misled the public, manipulated nicotine levels. And then CBS, there was a lot of questions there. Do we air this story? Because there's concerns over corporate interests. And it goes back and forth. And it's a great movie that shows these battles between corporate ownership and the editorial side. Now, I want to just talk a little bit, too, about my own personal experiences with this, because I've worked for many radio stations and television stations, essentially one newspaper, and I freelance for other organizations and magazines. But like during my tenure at the Sun-Times, I came to the Sun-Times right after Rupert Murdoch had sold the Chicago Sun-Times. He briefly owned the paper. This is in the early 80s. And he brought the tabloid sensibility, if you will, of the New York Post and sensationalism to Chicago, where it didn't really work. So for a brief period of time there, the Sun-Times had sensational front page stories, very much tabloid-esque. The famous columnist Mike Royko left the Sun-Times for the Chicago Tribune because of that, because of Murdoch buying the paper. I came there just after that, and the Sun-Times was kind of reeling from that, but was going back to its solid, gritty, blue-collar, city news bureau type journalism, along with colorful columnists and sports and all that. And enjoyed a very fortunate and wonderful career at the Sun-Times. And I worked on every side, news side, entertainment, did a lot of sports reporting in the 90s of Michael Jordan, the Bulls, and et cetera, et cetera. But we had different owners through the years. Sometimes it was more of a corporate group, and sometimes it was a very high-profile individual. Conrad Black was one of the owners of the Sun-Times. And I will say this, because I wrote, before I started getting into the entertainment game, I wrote thousands of opinion columns, straightforward news columns with, a lot of pop culture as well. But, traditional general interest daily columnist for the Sun-Times, 5 days a week for many years. And I will say this, I had some great editors, and the editors would come and go too, as well as the publishers and the owners. But I was let alone to write what I wanted to write about. Of course, there was vetting, and wanted to make sure that I didn't get into hot water over something that wasn't true. And like everybody else in the world of journalism, I've made mistakes, and you occasionally have to, publish corrections. But I can think of only one instance where they killed a column. And I'm not going to get into the details of it because it's kind of irrelevant in terms of what the actual specifics were. And I will just say this, the column that was killed, that they decided to not run in the paper, they were doing me a favor. And it wasn't because I had something wrong, but it wasn't the right tone for the moment. I'll just say that much. And the same thing in radio. I've worked for a lot of radio stations, and sometimes the program director had very different political views than I have. And I didn't do a lot of political shows, although I was part of some shows that were pretty political. But by and large, it was like, talk what you want to talk about. Sometimes it got a little bit contentious, but I was lucky in that case, in that faction of my career as well. And even with Ebert and Roeper, so the genesis of Siskel and Ebert was a local here in Chicago. Chicago was WTTW Channel 11. It was in PBS, then it went national on PBS. They eventually went to the Tribune Entertainment, and so we're on Channel 9 here in Chicago, and we're syndicated. And then eventually found a home with Buena Vista Television, which is the syndicated television arm of Disney. So when I hired onto the show, when I was lucky enough to join the program, which eventually became Ebert and Roeper, it was the same, we had the same bosses who were overseeing The View and Regis and Kelly, which is now Kelly and Mark, and a few other, talk shows like that. And some of them come and gone. So, when I got my checks, they were physical checks that were sent to me every Thursday when I was doing the show for 8+ years. There's a little Mickey Mouse. There's actually a little Mickey Mouse emblem in the corner of the check and on the envelope you get from them. It was very clear who our owners were, who owned the show. And we would sometimes go out and do events for Disney, and Roger and I, there was the Ebert and Roeper Film Festival at Sea, where we'd go on Disney cruise ships. So, there was a lot of symmetry there. And yes, that's what we worked for. And the film festival was really fun because people could sign up and hit the seas of the Caribbean with us. And then we'd have Brad Bird or, other directors and filmmakers. And it was really cool, who would join us and show their films. And we'd talk to the fans and all that great stuff. But again, here's the thing. We were never told what to say. There was a moment when there was a film that was directed by the son of Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney at the time. And I gave that movie a thumbs down, and we never heard a word from corporate about that. They had always had the mentality and the philosophy that the show was valuable as a freestanding review program, regardless of ownership. And even to this day, I still get little checks. I shouldn't say little checks. Checks with the little Mickey Mouse on them, because I review movies every Friday on ABC7 in Chicago, which is parent company is Disney. And again, I have never, and I've done this on and off for most of the last 15 years. I was at Fox News in Chicago, Fox 32, where also I was not told what to say, because Fox 32 in Chicago is a straightforward, solid group of journalists doing traditional morning shows and news programs. It's very different from Fox News, but it's still, again, all under the Fox umbrella. But in both cases, I've given my opinions, about movies and TV shows and other things. And once in a while, I hear from somebody saying, I disagree with what you said, but we're not going to pull the commentary. A lot of stuff is live, of course. So When I look at these much bigger stories than my little corner of the world, I feel very grateful, actually, that I've been allowed to give my reviews and state my opinions without much corporate interference. And I feel for the people at 60 Minutes and at CBS News and at other news organizations, the Washington Post, where you're just trying to do the best job you can, but there's this thing looming over you. And sometimes it's spoken, sometimes it's unspoken. And even then you're like, well, what are we going to do here? And it's never been a perfect and pure separation of church and state, if you will. There's always even if you're being left alone by the ownership, there's there's sales considerations and what you're going to say and who your clients are and everything. And you try to get to the truth and be transparent about it. But that's why sometimes you'll see on local newscasts across the country and probably in other parts of the world, they'll do a story and they'll say, and by the way, that movie is by ABC, the parent company of our news organization. You do the best you can. Well, I wanted to mention this too. This is pretty great. Final Destination's Bloodlines made over $50 million in its first weekend, more than $100 million globally. The film's performance is the most profitable opening weekend by far. The 2007 chapter of the Final Destination franchise had like a $27 million opening. So it's kind of interesting because it was 14 years after the most recent Final Destination. So when they put together Final Destination Bloodlines, I'm sure there was some discussion like, well, how many, what kind of interest is there among the young moviegoers, the horror fans? And it turns out, you think about, well, probably a lot of people who are going to the movies now grew up on watching these movies. They might have been 3 when the first one came out, but they watched them on home video in one form or another. So they were really into it. And, the great thing about these Final Destination movies is they are what they are. You're going to get some wacky backstory, but it's all about people who cheat death, and then death gets very creative in getting revenge. And it's like how they do the set pieces, and you kind of just like cringe in anticipation because you see a moment, you see a live wire crackling, or you see a socket with a little bit of smoke coming out of it, or you see somebody, picking up a farm implement and with spikes on it or something, and you just know what's coming next. So good for Final Destination Bloodlines. Doing big business. Thunderbolts continues to do well. Let's see. It's now earned $155 at home, $325 million abroad. And Sinners, which is the best movie of the year so far, is over $200 million in the States and over $300 million worldwide. So we talk so much about box office and our movies dying, and I know it's still a struggle and it's a battle, but a lot of people are going to the movies, and we got big stuff coming up. We got Mission Impossible and others. And in fact, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to give you my take. We talked a little bit about it last week, but we're going to dive a little deeper into Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. All right, kids, let's talk about Portillo's. It's one of my favorite places to eat on the planet Earth. My delivery history will bear this out. I also happen to live within walking distance of one of the Chicago Portillo's. Yes, that's right. I'm that lucky. It is amazing. You could order from the restaurant or the drive-thru, but if it's not near you, you can go to portillos.com, and order. They got French fries. They got all kinds of comfort food. The amazing hot dogs, the Italian beef, the Italian sausage, some really good salads, by the way, if you want to take it a little bit easy, because you want to have a little bit room left for the chocolate cake, the best chocolate cake in the world. Think about it. Portillos.com, Portillos.com. That's how you spell it, Portillos.com.
CIA Black Vault break-in.
Am I reading this correctly? The Kremlin bombing?
In fairness, the bomb was actually meant to kill him. We have to deal with him.
Should he choose to accept?
Smart people on every side are close to panicking.
What exactly is your plan?
I need you to trust me. One last time.
All right, you might have heard just a little bit about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. If only they could have gotten Tom Cruise to do some publicity for this film. So this is the 8th, and it looks like possibly the final installment in this long-running action franchise that goes back like 30 years. The other night, I rewatched the original Mission Impossible, Brian De Palma, and Tom Cruise. Jesus Christ, he looks the same, almost the same. It's interesting too. I didn't love the first film. It has a lot of great elements. I thought it had some very hokey twists and turns, and I've been up and down on the Mission Impossible franchise. I think some are really, really strong, and others seem more like placeholders. But in the original, there is a moment, if you watch it early on. So John Voight is Mr. Phelps, right? He's the head of the Impossible Mission Force, which is Tom Cruise and a bunch of other characters that by now most of them are dead. But they're giving him a hard time about their boss, about how he's got these cushy assignments. And Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt says, where was your last assignment? The Plaza? And the response is Drake Hotel, Chicago. So that's where their boss was. And he's living it up there, supposedly. And I couldn't help but chortle and chuckle because the Drake Hotel in Chicago is the same hotel where Tom Cruise tracks down his character of Joel Goodman in Risky Business. That's where he tracks down Lana in Risky Business. It's the Drake Hotel. So there you go. It's like 1 degree of separation. So, okay. So Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is the second part of really a 4-5 hour movie that started with Dead Reckoning Part 1. So they're trying, it's Ethan Hunt and his team, Benji, played by Simon Pegg, Luther, Ving Rhames, Grace, played by Haley Atwell, and there's other characters who come into play, but they're trying to retrieve that cruciform key, right? The 2-part cruciform key, which is the key literally to accessing and neutralizing the entity, which is that AI life form thingy that has, become self-aware and is going to take over the world. And that's, a plot we've seen a million times. So in The Final Reckoning, again, all the publicity, Tom Cruise is not only I don't want to say the last great movie star, but the world's biggest star. And he's had an incredible run at the top with only a few little dips over the last 30 plus years, really 40 years. And we've all seen the behind the scenes videos and explanations of the biplane stunt. And isn't it amazing that Tom Cruise does these stunts himself and these elaborate set pieces, and they're fantastic. And there's this giant underwater sequence. And I'd just like to point this out. With all the publicity about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, and all the appearances by Tom Cruise in the cast, and all the great moments where you see Tom Cruise at one premiere where he's talking to, staff members at AMC for like 15 minutes, and Tom Cruise, munching on popcorn, Tom Cruise showing us how he did this stunt and that stunt. Have you noticed that almost nobody's talking about the movie, the actual quality of the movie? And I know this sounds crazy, but the story? Well, that's because for all its pyrotechnics and these great set pieces and Tom Cruise's movie star appeal and a wonderful supporting cast, all that energy, and they have one of the most tired, listless, convoluted plots of any Mission Impossible movie or any action movie. And that's why I'm in the 2 to 2.5 star category. Listen, I know you're saying we don't go to the Mission Impossible movies for stories, but the movies that resonate with you, the big set action movies that resonate with you, I think, in most cases, they actually do have great stories and complex characters and interesting villains. And the villains in these movies have never, well, Philip Seymour Hoffman, there have been some great villains, but not particularly in this last one. So to me, it's like, I wish they had said, you know what, we have all this money, and we have Tom Cruise, and we have McHugh, the director, who knows how to stage, some of the best action sequences of all time. I'm not denying that. Although the problem is too, they go on forever. But it wouldn't have been great if they said, let's bring in some of the best screenwriters in the world and see if we can maybe add another level to this. So you look at, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Running time 2 hours and 49 minutes. And I want to mention some other action films, action-driven films, and just great entertainment films with similar running times, okay? Matrix Revolutions, exactly the same, 2 hours and 49 minutes. Interstellar, 2 hours, 49 minutes. The Dark Knight Rises, 2 hours, 45 minutes. Django Unchained, 2:45. No Time to Die, 2:43. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 2 hours and 41 minutes. So all of them roughly the same length, within 5 minutes, 8 minutes at the most, of Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. And all those movies I mentioned have so much more going for them than Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. If you're going to go with a running time of 2 hours and 49 minutes, and listen, I know they've done that with some of that, Transformers movies and Fast and Furious movies are bloated as well. But when you look about those other films, how much more is going on? There's violence and action and, cool visuals in all of them, but there's so many interesting and rich and layered and memorable characters and so much more going on. So Mission Impossible is going to be a hit. The last one wasn't actually a huge hit, in terms of the budget and everything. And it's getting generally positive reviews. I think it's around 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I get it. And a lot of people are saying, you go for the action. But I'm telling you, when you go to see this movie and the third time, everybody stands around with the big exposition scene, explaining what they're going to do next and how they're going to get the cruciform key and how they're going to trap the villain. One, you have to keep doing that. You're acknowledging, and they've done that in some Marvel movies, you're acknowledging that you're all over the place. And the biplane sequence, it's pretty great. It's listen, it's way over the top. Of course it is. But the underwater sequence in particular, which is a marvel of filmmaking, but my goodness, it went on and on and on and on. So be warned. There's an app called Run Pee, which tells you when you should pee during a movie. I always say you should go before and after, but I hate to say this, but if you go see this at the theater and you have to step outside for a couple of minutes, they're probably still going to be treading water, so to speak. Too long, too bloated, too convoluted. So not the greatest send-off for the franchise. I still, listen, if you want to go see it, you're going to go see it. But I'd be interested to hear from some of you guys after you actually see the movie, if you share my opinion that it's too long and yet too thin. I wanted to mention a couple other quick releases. We're a little tight on time here, but Sirens on Netflix.
There's a transient person at the house asking for you. She's carrying hot garbage. She says she's your sister.
No. I told you Dad got diagnosed with early onset dementia, and you said a fruit basket.
Welcome, ladies. Sips and nibbles are in the back.
What is this place, and why does everyone look like an Easter egg? Is this still their property?
Michaela, she's my boss. I get to call her Kiki. It's a really special honor. Hey!
Who's this?
This is my sister.
I didn't know you existed.
Trust me, Simone and I are very close.
Then why didn't she tell me about you?
Where are your tattoos?
I removed them.
Our matching sister tattoo?
Kiki said it was trashy.
My sister seems to really worship your wife.
Yeah, Kiki has that effect on people.
Breath?
10 out of 10. Mine? Take my gum.
So this is an interesting, we have so many of these limited streaming series about rich people and their problems. So the story here centers on Megan Fahey plays Devin, who's a troubled sister. She's taking care of her father, who's dealing with Alzheimer's. In the meantime, her sister Simone, played by Millie Alcock. By the way, Megan Fahey, you might probably know her best from White Lotus, and Millie Alcock from House of the Dragon. So her sister Simone is become the live-in assistant to a super rich socialite named Michaela, played by Julianne Moore. But Devin, Megan Fahey character, is worried that her sister Simone is in a cult, that Michaela is a cult leader, has this kind of control over her staff and the local folks. And there's this bizarre charity gala coming up. And on top of all that, you get Kevin Bacon as Peter Cal, who's Michaela's billionaire husband. So you got this great cast, and you have the usual, you have the estranged sisters. One is a troublemaker, blue collar, her own worst enemy. The other one has refashioned herself as the assistant and trusted best friend of this socialite. And now they're going to come and clash, and there could be maybe some crime and scandal afoot. I think it's a lot of fun. It's like another one of these series where you can kind of just binge watch it, and some of it's silly, but that cast is amazing. I also really want to stress that There's a new documentary, 2-part series coming on HBO, and I really want to stress how much I hope you guys watch this. It's called Pee-wee as Himself, and it's about Pee-wee Herman. Paul Reubens, of course, his character of Pee-wee Herman, and I know a lot of you know this, but Paul Reubens created this character of Pee-wee, who was this sort of innocent, slightly strange, upbeat, energetic, bizarre character who started as, I think he started doing it like a stage shows. He was in the Groundlings, and then it became a TV thing. I know he was featured on, I think, the HBO Young Comedians as Pee-wee Herman. We didn't even know Paul Reubens' name for many, many years. Most people didn't. And then the Tim Burton movie, and then there was a sequel, and there was an iconic Christmas special. So Pee-wee became this, this huge superstar. So this 2-part documentary by Matt Wolf, it's very interesting because he's talking to Paul Reubens in real time in recent years, and who in this documentary is in his 60s, and he's Paul Reubens. He's not in character. And there's a lot of back and forth between Reubens and Wolf about who's going to have control over the documentary, because they also get into the 2 scandals that hit Paul Reubens, the actual person. Both really, if you look at the details, trumped up. And the first one involved him being in an adult theater, and whether or not he was manipulating himself, he always claimed that he wasn't. And then there was a second one about possession of materials that were considered offensive. And if you look at the details in both cases, you're like, man, this guy really got a bum ride. And it has influenced and shaped people's opinions of Paul Reubens. And he had some comebacks and did another Pee-wee movie. But it's a fascinating documentary. It goes all the way back to Paul Reubens' roots. Growing up, his family eventually moved to Sarasota, and his father was this kind of, daredevil macho pilot. His mother was cool, and he got a sister, but they embraced him. And Paul Reubens, actually, as a young man in the 60s and 70s, was in the San Francisco scene, and he was actually out as gay. And then when he started to, create the Pee-wee character, he was closeted for decades. Now addresses this in this documentary.
It's weird to be in this situation having a documentary made, because I'm used to having control of my alter ego. I lost control of my anonymity, and it was devastating. I don't want to come off like a victim in some way. I kept who I was a secret for a really long time. I hid behind an alter ego.
Today's secret word is fun.
I want kids to learn, not only is being different okay, let's celebrate it, but I want that not just for you, but for myself, for it all. I'm gonna leave out the part where we did enormous amounts of drugs. I didn't.
The sad thing about this is the filmmakers didn't know that nobody knew that Paul Reubens was dying of cancer, had been battling it for years. And the last few thoughts he records, because there was a lot of differences with the director, so Paul Reubens, deep into it after hours and hours of interviews and all kinds of filming, wanted to step away from the film, but he didn't have the control over it, and that was part of the problem. But he recorded some thoughts on his own, Paul Reubens, from his home on audio. Beautifully sad and heartbreaking. And it was actually, I think, the day before he passed away in 2023. So it's a great documentary because it gets into all sorts of, all the facets of Paul Reubens' life, and then ends up becoming what he didn't want it to be. He says this, but, it is a legacy tribute. And I know some people, they don't really, if you're younger, you might not have realized what a huge phenomenon. Pee-wee Herman was a singular, unique, bizarre, lovable, wonderful, incredible creation and a pop culture phenomenon. And it really takes you through all that. So that's a 2-part documentary series. It's on HBO, and it's called Pee-wee as Himself. I hope you check it out. That's going to do it for this week's podcast. We will be back soon. Thanks for listening.